Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly fascinating, deeply chilling, and honestly, highly debated piece of source material that pushes right up against the absolute limits of the human mind. We're looking at a story centered around a rumored, top secret Soviet experiment, one that tests the absolute boundaries of human psychology, physical endurance, and, well, sanity. It's a narrative that has literally captivated and terrified people for years. And today we're going to break down exactly what this source material claims happened, step by terrifying step.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to really let this premise sink in for a second. Imagine staying awake for 30 straight days. No sleep, no dreams, absolutely no escape. I mean, it sounds biologically impossible, right? But the source material details an account of a covert military experiment where subjects were forced into exactly this nightmare scenario. And the narrative suggests that what happens when the human brain is denied its most basic, fundamental restorative function is so horrifying that every official record of the event was allegedly wiped from existence.
So, the story takes us way back to the late 1940s, right in the immediate aftermath of World War II. According to the text, a highly classified Soviet military lab was gearing up for an experiment unlike anything the world had ever seen. The subjects? 5 political prisoners. But the incentive they were offered was the ultimate prize. They were promised their complete, unconditional freedom. The catch? They just had to survive a 30-day wakefulness experiment. 5 guys, 30 days, zero sleep. Now, to pull this off, the scientists obviously needed a highly controlled environment. The prisoners were sealed completely inside a heavily reinforced chamber, but it wasn't just some barren cell, you know? It was actually stocked with books, games, cots, running water, and enough dry rations to easily last the entire month. The catch was there were hidden microphones tucked into every corner to monitor their conversations, and the room was continuously pumped with this mysterious experimental gas, a gas specifically formulated to keep the subjects awake without causing them to just instantly drop dead. Meanwhile, the scientists sat safely outside, calmly observing the whole thing through thick glass windows. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the dramatic behavioral shift. For the first 4 days, everything seemed completely normal. The subjects laughed, read, played games, shared stories about their families, just guys passing the time. But on day 5, a dark switch just flipped. The casual joking stopped, entirely replaced by hushed whispers and extreme paranoia. This right here is an absolutely crucial psychological turning point. So, why exactly does sleep deprivation cause such severe paranoia? Well, when the brain is denied REM sleep for extended periods, the amygdala, which is basically the brain's emotional threat detection center, becomes completely unmoored. Without the restorative filter of sleep, the mind literally loses its ability to distinguish reality from perceived threats, twisting totally normal thoughts into intense suspicion. The subjects stop trusting each other altogether, secretly whispering wild accusations into the microphones about crimes their fellow prisoners had supposedly committed. The paranoia spread through that sealed room like a virus. And following this timeline, that psychological breakdown rapidly escalated into pure physical horror. By day 9, the tension finally snapped. The first scream echoed through the chamber. The source describes one prisoner running back and forth, screaming continuously at the absolute top of his lungs for nearly 3 hours straight. He only stopped because his vocal cords had completely shredded and failed. But you want to know the most unsettling part? The other 4 prisoners didn't even react. They just stared, as if this horrific, unending screaming match was just totally normal. And then by day 10, the screaming stopped entirely, replaced by a terrifying, heavy, complete silence. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the prisoner's next move was entirely coordinated and deeply, deeply unsettling. Right in the middle of that dead silence, they quietly started ripping pages out of the books they'd been given. They covered those pages in their own saliva and methodically pasted them over every single one of the thick glass observation windows. In an instant, the scientists lost all visual contact. The observers were completely blinded, left with literally nothing but the readings from the room's oxygen sensors to prove the 5 men inside were even still breathing. For 3 agonizing days, the researchers heard and saw absolutely nothing. No voices, no movement. Just the steady, rhythmic hum of the oxygen sensors indicating shallow breathing. The scientists naturally began to panic, fearing that everyone inside had either died or slipped into some sort of collective coma. Finally, by day 15, they just couldn't take the mystery anymore. They decided they had to break their own strict protocol. Over the chamber's loudspeaker, they announced, "We are opening the door. Stay calm and follow instructions." The scientists waited for a response, expecting a plea for help or maybe a cry of relief. Instead, a single voice answered from inside the chamber. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't panicked, it was incredibly calm and just ice cold. The voice simply said, "We no longer wish to be free." The sheer unnaturalness of that statement absolutely froze the scientists in their tracks. Whatever the heck was happening inside that room, those prisoners no longer cared about the very freedom they had just risked their lives for.
Very slowly, the heavy steel doors were opened, and the reality the scientists found defied all logic. The chamber had essentially become a slaughterhouse. The food rations hadn't been touched in days. The floor was literally covered in blood and scattered flesh. One of the 5 prisoners lay dead. The remaining 4 were alive, sure, but horribly injured with huge chunks of their own bodies missing. But here is the most horrifying detail from the source text. They had inflicted these wounds on themselves. One prisoner was calmly tearing flesh from his own arm and chewing it, feeling absolutely no pain, showing zero fear. And guys, they were smiling.
Medical teams rushed in to save them, but the prisoners did not want to be saved. They fought back with this impossible, desperate violence. And the crazy thing is, they weren't fighting to escape the facility, they were fighting to stay inside the gas-filled chamber. The source notes that one prisoner actually smiled directly at a soldier right before attacking him with completely unnatural strength. Heavily armed guards were seriously injured, and one reportedly died in the struggle. Even when the doctors finally managed to restrain them and attempt emergency surgery, the horrors just kept coming. The anesthesia? It simply didn't work. The prisoners violently, physically refused to lose consciousness. During this chaotic medical intervention, one of the horribly mutilated subjects leaned in and whispered this chilling explanation for their resistance. "If I sleep, I'll die." Their absolute terror of losing consciousness was so profound, so deep, that even while undergoing major surgery without working anesthesia, their heart rates remained completely, eerily stable. Their eyes stayed wide open. It was as if the concept of sleep itself, the very thing their battered bodies desperately needed, had completely transformed into their ultimate, most terrifying enemy.
Now, the crucial point is, the nightmare was far from over. The military demanded the immediate shutdown of the whole project, but a lead scientist who was completely obsessed with understanding what they had just created forced the surviving subjects right back into the chamber. But this time, they were put in without the experimental wakefulness gas, and the exact moment the gas began to fade from their systems, absolute panic ensued. The prisoners, who had just been cold, calculated, and violent, suddenly began to beg, scream, and cry. One shouted repeatedly to turn the gas back on, while another slammed his head against the wall until he died, literally destroying himself rather than risking falling asleep. Eventually, only one mutilated survivor remained in the chamber with the lead scientist. The scientist, demanding answers from the nightmare sitting right in front of him, asked one final question. "What are you?" The prisoner just smiled and delivered this haunting monologue. "We are what hides inside every human mind, waiting for sleep." It was this grim declaration that the madness wasn't actually created by the gas at all, but merely unleashed by the total absence of sleep. Seconds after delivering this line, a soldier fired his weapon, silencing the final prisoner, and the chamber forever. And that brings us to the aftermath of this dark tale. According to the narrative, immediately following that gunshot, every single document connected to the experiment vanished. Poof, gone. Today, there are absolutely no official government records to be found. There's no confirmed, verifiable evidence that this laboratory ever even existed in the first place. There are only stories. Stories passed from person to person, forum to forum, and that massive lack of evidence leaves us with a giant void filled only by the horrifying details of the narrative itself. Which leaves us with the ultimate question presented by the source. Is the Russian sleep experiment a real, highly classified cover-up of science gone horribly wrong? Or is it simply one of the internet's most brilliantly crafted, terrifying horror legends? The source material lays out all the claims, but it leaves the final judgment entirely up to you. Could the human mind truly turn into something so completely unrecognizable if denied sleep for a month? It is a fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling question to walk away with. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will see you next time.